been 3 years since Russia brutally invaded Ukraine, and the Ukrainian people are still giving their lives so that Ukraine may live. Here to help dissect that is Dr. Perry Bush. So welcome, Perry.
Always good to be with you on WLO, Chris.
All right. So the war possibly coming to an end, possibly not. What do you think?
Well, right now, the president is engaged in peace talks with Vladimir Putin, the dictator of Russia, who started the war. But they're not including Ukraine as part of those talks. So Ukraine says, we're not even at the table. So I don't see how this can apply to us. I mean, you want peace, well, then let us speak for our own needs as our own country. It's interesting to contrast here a little bit, Chris, if you don't mind, two different leading Republicans on this issue. You know, on one hand, there's Governor DeWine, who's a conservative Republican. Our governor here in Ohio, who issued a statement on the 3-year anniversary of this war this past Tuesday, in which he clearly condemned Russia for violating international law and its invasion of Ukraine, and called Russian actions unacceptable, and it reminded Ukraine of Ohio's solidarity with him as the governor of Ohio. So, I mean, that's one approach to the war, and that's an approach that some Republicans in Congress have been taking. Mike Turner, Congress representative from Dayton, has also issued condemnatory statements of Russian actions. But, it's interesting to contrast that with President Trump in these last 2 weeks and his actions. Chris, I'm still trying to wrap my head around what's going on with him, because he blamed actually Ukraine. Trump blamed Ukraine for starting the war, which is a gross historical inaccuracy. It's hard to understand the logic there. So I got to admit, Chris, I'm in a story, and I follow these events carefully. I've lived in Ukraine, taught in Ukraine. It's hard for me to understand what's going on here in the president's mind, why he's doing this, why he is lining up with basically the talking points come out of the Kremlin and cozying up to Vladimir Putin. The only sense I can make of it is that Trump, I think, is reverting to a much older model of global affairs, in which, one of the first things he did when he returned to the White House the second time is he put up a model of his new favorite president, William McKinley, the president of 120 years ago, in which, that era, 1900, few great nations sat around and decided the fates of smaller nations. Trump said that Putin needs to come back in the group of 7, needs to come back in the international community, needs to end the sanctions on Russia, ought to end, that we ought to have Russia accepted as a member of the global community. I mean, this aggressive, brutal nation who just invaded its neighbor. Trump wants to let them all back in and put it all behind us. Maybe he sees himself as acting in the spirit of William McKinley 100 years ago, that kind of the great powers decide. Well, that was also aged by the way of brutal imperialism. And, you have to wonder, is the world ready? None of us really want to go back to that kind of world? What about, say, Asia and China? China has long regarded, ever since its founding, the modern nation of China has regarded Taiwan as a renegade province that shouldn't exist. And the United States, for 80 years, has held firm and says, no, China's an independent nation, sovereign nation. We're going to protect we're going to do its defense. If it's attacked, well, maybe China thinks, well, if the United States isn't going to defend Ukraine, and maybe in that whole series of global power balances in Europe is gone, well, maybe no one's going to stop us if we move towards Taiwan. Well, the last time we had these kind of calculations made, in which aggressors simply proceeded unchecked, Chris, it ended in global war. So it's a real, into World War II. It's a really disconcerting moment on the national stage.
Well, I guess we'll find out in the near future. I think we got a long way to go with this yet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Every day there's a new development, man. It's hard to get just the news every day. You go, wow, what's going to happen today? It's remarkably interesting to watch, but it's unsettling. It's an unsettling moment.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate it.
Good to be with you, Chris.
All right. Well, don't go away because we have more when we return.